I met Sarah during our second year of college. From the first time we started talking, I felt like we had a special connection. It was not long before we became a couple. For 3 years, we dated, spending nearly every day together. Once we finished school, it just felt natural for us to move in together. We lived that way for another 3 years before we decided to make it official and got married. Things felt right, and I was happy to have her by my side. 2 years after we got married, Sarah got pregnant, and soon we were parents to a beautiful baby girl, Emily. Life was simple, happy even. Sure, we had our disagreements, but who doesn't? Every couple has arguments. But we always found a way to patch things up before they even escalated, sometimes in the middle of the argument itself. It felt like we had the perfect family. After college, I started working at a small firm, then another. Gradually, I began climbing the corporate ladder. It took years, but eventually, I was able to earn enough to buy us a nice condo. We fixed it up and made it feel like home. Sarah, after her maternity leave, went back to work too. She was always sharp and driven. It didn't take her long to rise through the ranks, and soon, she landed a great position, making good money. Between her income and mine, we were doing more than okay. We bought everything we needed and more. Another apartment for Emily to have when she grew up, luxury cars, you name it, we had it. I never even thought about being unfaithful. It wasn't just because I loved her, but because I genuinely believed we had something special. I didn't drink too much either, except for the occasional beer here and there with friends. Nothing crazy. Sarah's job had a lot of international business involved. Her company regularly hosted foreign clients who flew in for meetings. For the most part, this was normal to me. But about a year ago, I started noticing that every time these colleagues from abroad came to town, Sarah would stay late at the office, way later than usual. I brushed it off at first. Then, small things started to pile up. Late at night, I noticed her phone would buzz with messages. She told me they were just work-related. But I noticed something strange. Whenever her colleagues were in town, her phone did not buzz at all at night. Suspicious? Maybe, but I was not one to snoop. Then, one evening, her phone buzzed again, just as we were lying in bed. She had already fallen asleep, so I picked it up. The message was gone. All of them were. It was like her inbox was wiped clean every night. And that is when the worm of doubt began to gnaw at me. Something was off. It was hard to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself it was just in my head, but that gnawing doubt would not go away. Little things started to stand out. Sarah was glued to her phone more than usual, always keeping it close. She used to leave it lying around without a second thought, but now it was almost like she was afraid to let it out of her sight. One night, she came home much later than expected, nearly 10 o'clock. Normally, I would not have thought much of it, but something about that night felt off. So, I tried to joke. So, what? Did you drop your boyfriend off on the way home? I was grinning, expecting her to laugh or roll her eyes, but instead, she froze. For a second, I saw panic flash across her face. Her eyes widened, and she stood completely still, like a deer caught in headlights. It was the kind of reaction you get when someone's been caught red-handed. Then, just as quickly, she forced a smile and let out a nervous laugh, brushing off my comment. "You're such an idiot," she muttered, turning away, her face tense. She pretended to be busy with her phone, but I could tell she was flustered. That night, I could not sleep. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over in my head. What had just happened? I wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. But that flicker of fear in her eyes, it was like a bomb had gone off in my gut. I had never seen her look like that, and the fact that she had tried to brush it off so quickly only made me more uneasy. Things kept getting stranger. She started traveling more for work. Before, it had been every couple of months, but now it was almost every other week. She said it was just because her role had expanded, and she needed to meet more clients face to face. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard not to feel like she was slipping away from me, little by little. I told myself I was overreacting. Sarah would never cheat on me, right? We had built this life together. We had Emily. But that seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing. One evening, after she left for another work trip, I found myself sitting alone, obsessing over it. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was racing, trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle. Something just did not add up. That is when I did something I never thought I would do. I installed a spy app on her phone. It felt wrong, like I was crossing a line that I could never uncross. But I was desperate for answers. The app allowed me to remotely access her phone, record the surroundings, even take photos using the camera. I told myself I just needed peace of mind, that once I saw there was nothing to worry about, I would delete it and move on. But deep down, I already knew the truth. That night, I sat in front of my computer, hands trembling. I sent the command to record her surroundings for the next 10 minutes. I waited, my heart pounding, as the recording uploaded. When the file finally appeared, I clicked play, holding my breath. What I heard shattered my world. The recording started off with nothing but muffled sounds, static, footsteps, and the occasional clink of something in the background. For a moment, I thought maybe it was all just in my head. Maybe Sarah really was just in her hotel room after a long day of meetings, winding down like anyone would. I almost felt relieved, until I heard a man's voice. I froze. At first, the words were indistinct, the kind of low rumble that might pass for business talk in a casual setting. But the more I listened, the more clear it became. This was not just small talk about work. They were chatting about personal things, laughing together in a way that felt far too familiar. It was intimate. Too intimate. My stomach clenched. I could hear them clearly now, joking about their day. They were sharing details, what they had for dinner, a funny moment from earlier. Their voices were soft, comfortable, and close. She was speaking in that playful tone I hadn't heard from her in years, and every time she laughed, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. They were alone. I knew it. The sound of glasses clinking pulled me back to the moment. I could almost picture it. The two of them in her hotel room, drinking wine, sharing a private moment. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. I was still hoping, somehow, that I was wrong, that it was all just an innocent misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. The way she laughed, the tone of her voice, the ease with which they spoke to each other. It was clear they were far more than just colleagues. Desperate for confirmation, I sent a command to the spy app, telling it to take a picture with the phone's rear camera. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, as the image processed. When it finally appeared, it was a black, blurry mess. The phone was lying face down on a surface, probably the nightstand. Frustrated, I sent another command, this time to the front-facing camera. The image returned almost immediately. It was a hotel room, just like I had imagined. The bed was neatly made, the lamp on the nightstand casting a soft, dim light. I could see part of the bed, and on the edge of it, someone was sitting. He was sitting. Only half of him was visible, but it was enough. Enough to confirm everything I had feared. A sick feeling washed over me, but I could not stop. I had to know more. I sent another command, this time, to record for 20 minutes. I told myself that maybe this was where I would get the truth, but a part of me was terrified of what I might hear. The next recording arrived. My hands trembled as I clicked play. At first, it was more of the same. Light conversation, laughter. Then, there was a long pause. The clinking of glasses stopped. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow as I listened. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of lips meeting. A soft kiss, then another, followed by a slight giggle from Sarah. My heart sank. It was happening. Right in front of me, through the speakers of my own computer, I was hearing my wife with another man. Her laugh became quieter, more subdued. There was a shift in the tone of their conversation. The voices dropped lower, more intimate. I could hear the rustling of fabric, the subtle sound of movement. I felt sick. Then, I heard something that hit me like a punch to the chest. A soft moan. It was unmistakable. A sound I had heard so many times before, but never like this. Not like this. Not with someone else. The moans became more frequent, breathier. Her voice. It was the voice I knew. The voice that had whispered my name in the dark so many times before, but now it was saying his name. I could not make out the exact words, but the meaning was clear. The gentle sounds of passion. The kind that only two people who know each other in the most intimate way can make. began filling my ears. I sat frozen, my body tense, unable to move as the recording continued to play. Her breathing quickened. His voice joined in, low and deep, murmuring something I could not quite catch. The rustling grew louder, more intense. The rhythm of their movements, her movements, became unmistakable. The sound of skin brushing against skin, the soft creak of the bed, the rising tension in their breaths. It was too much. My mind was racing, imagining every detail of what was happening in that room. I heard her gasp and then, as if the final blow, her unmistakable cry of pleasure. It was a sound I knew all too well, and hearing it now, with him, tore something deep inside me. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, but I could not stop listening. I heard them shift again, more movement, her soft whimpers growing louder. She was fully giving herself to him. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the way her breath hitched with every movement he made. Then came the crescendo. The bed creaked louder, her breathing was rapid, almost gasping, and then, with a final cry, it was over. Silence followed. The only sounds were their heavy breaths, the aftermath of what they had just done. I felt like I was going to throw up. Shakily, I sent one more command, this time to take a picture using the front camera. The image came through, and I stared at it, horrified. Sarah's phone was lying next to her, on the bed, facing upward. I could see part of her body. She was straddling him, naked, her back slightly arched, the sheets half covering them. It was unmistakable. She was on top of him, caught in the very act. I could not breathe. I could not think. My world shattered in that moment, the betrayal so clear, so absolute. My wife, the mother of my child, was with another man, and I had just heard and seen it all. I did not sleep that night. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of Sarah with him. The way her body moved, the sound of her voice. It played on repeat in my mind like a nightmare I could not escape. I felt trapped, unable to escape the pain, the betrayal. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I was jolted awake by the sound of my daughter, Emily, knocking on the door. Her soft voice called out, "Daddy, it's time for school." I scrambled out of bed, my head pounding from the stress and lack of sleep. I had forgotten it was morning already, and the reality of everything came crashing down on me all over again. My heart ached as I opened the door and saw her standing there, her innocent face looking up at me, unaware of the storm tearing her family apart. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How about we take the day off today? You can stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a bit." Emily's face lit up at the idea, and I managed to smile, though inside I felt like I was breaking apart. After getting her dressed and packing a small bag, I drove her over to my parents' house, all the while trying to act normal, like everything was fine. But I could barely keep it together. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of what I had uncovered was suffocating me. When I dropped her off, my mom asked if everything was okay. I told her I was just feeling a little under the weather and needed to rest. She did not push further, but I could see the concern in her eyes. I went back home to an empty house. Sarah was still away, probably still with him. I sat down on the couch and opened my laptop, staring at the screen for what felt like hours. I still had the recordings, the pictures, the proof. And as much as I wanted to delete it all and pretend this had never happened, I knew I could not. I needed it. I needed to hear the truth from her own mouth. But when she came back, I knew I had to be prepared. I could not confront her yet. Not like this. Not when I was so raw, so broken. Instead, I sent a message to my boss, letting him know I was taking a few days off to recover. I had no idea what I would do during those days, but I knew I could not face anyone, not yet. The next few hours passed in a blur. My emotions swung wildly. One moment I was angry, furious even, imagining all the ways I could confront her, expose her, make her feel the pain I was going through. The next moment, I was lost in sadness, devastated that the life we had built was crumbling before my eyes. I was not just losing Sarah. I was losing the future I had imagined for us, the family we had created. At some point, I opened the recordings again. I had to listen, Had to know everything, even though it was like twisting the knife in deeper. The 4-hour recording I had set the night before still waited in my inbox. I did not know if I could handle it, but I clicked play anyway. For the first 20 minutes, it was just background noise. The sounds of the hotel, muffled conversations, and the occasional creak of the bed. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for what I knew was coming. Then, slowly, the sounds I dreaded began to fill the room again. I could hear her voice, soft, playful, seductive. They were talking again, the way two lovers talk when they are lying in bed together after everything is over. She laughed, and he said something I could not quite make out. It did not matter. What mattered was the ease between them, the comfort, the intimacy. And then the sounds changed again. There was movement, the rustling of sheets, and Sarah's breath hitched. I knew what was happening before I even heard it. The telltale signs of bodies shifting, the familiar sounds of anticipation. My fists clenched as I listened, my blood boiling with every passing second. Her voice was softer now, breathier, and then I heard it again. The same sound that had haunted me all night. The sound of her moaning, the sound of her giving herself to him. It was a sound that used to belong to me, but now it was his. I listened, unable to tear myself away, as they moved together. Her breathing became ragged, faster, as the unmistakable rhythm of their lovemaking filled the speakers. I could hear every moment, the soft gasps, the creaking of the bed, the low grunt from him as they found their pace. The worst part was how familiar it all was. I knew those sounds. I knew every rise and fall in her voice, every change in her breath. I knew exactly what she was feeling, even though I was not there. And knowing that someone else was experiencing that with her tore me apart. It went on like that, the sounds of their bodies moving in sync, of her soft cries growing louder as they reached their climax. It was intimate, raw, and completely devastating. I could hear the pleasure in her voice, the way she let herself go, the way she surrendered to him. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it was over. Silence fell again, broken only by their heavy breaths. The recording continued for a few more minutes, just the sound of them lying there together, speaking in hushed tones. I could not listen any longer. I shut the laptop and stared at the wall, numb. This was my reality now. This was the truth I could not escape. The days leading up to Sarah's return felt like a blur. I drifted through them, barely eating, barely sleeping. My mind was consumed by what I had seen, what I had heard. The recordings haunted me, echoing in my head every time I closed my eyes. I still did not know how to confront her, or even if I could without completely losing it. But I knew one thing. I needed to face her. I needed to hear her say it. It was Sunday evening when she came home. I heard her keys jingling in the lock, and I felt my whole body tense. Every nerve was on edge. My heart pounded so hard in my chest that it felt like I might pass out from the adrenaline. She stepped into the house like nothing had happened, like she had just come back from another regular business trip. She looked tired but content, and it made my stomach turn. How could she stand there, act like everything was normal, after what she had done? "Hey, babe," she said, dropping her bags by the door and walking over to me. She leaned in to kiss me, but I pulled back, keeping my face cold. I could not even look at her. Not yet. She frowned, obviously taken aback by my reaction. "What's wrong?" she asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "I'm not feeling well," I muttered. "Probably caught something. I've been staying home for the past few days." Her eyes softened, and she reached out to touch my arm. I almost recoiled from her touch, but I stopped myself. I could not tip her off yet. "I'm sorry, honey," she said, her voice full of false sympathy. "You should have told me. I would have come home sooner." The words hit me like a slap in the face. She was lying right to my face, and she did not even flinch. How many times had she lied to me before? How many nights had she spent with him, while I sat at home with Emily, thinking she was working late or away for business? I nodded, playing along, but my mind was spinning. I knew I could not confront her just yet. I needed more time to gather myself, to prepare for the moment I would finally let her see the truth. That night, I could not bear to sleep next to her. I told her I needed to rest, and took a pillow and blanket to the living room couch. Sarah barely questioned it, probably thinking I was just too sick to care. Little did she know that the real sickness was the thought of being near her after what I had heard. The next morning, I woke up early, still feeling like a zombie. Sarah was in the kitchen, making breakfast for Emily, humming to herself as if life was just perfect. The sight of her so happy, so content, made my blood boil. But I forced myself to stay calm. I had a plan. I had to act like everything was normal, at least for the moment. I got dressed, kissed Emily goodbye as she left for school, and went to work. But my mind was not on my job. It was on the flash drive I had prepared over the weekend, the one that contained all the recordings, the photos, and the evidence of her betrayal. That evening, I came home and found Sarah waiting for me with a smile on her face, like everything was perfectly fine. The sight of her made me sick. How could she pretend so easily? I wanted to scream at her, to throw the flash drive at her face and demand answers. But I held back. Not yet. Hey, I'm going to pack a few things for a quick business trip tomorrow, I lied. It'll just be for a day or two. Oh, she said, her smile faltering slightly. That's kind of sudden. Huh? You just took a few days off. I shrugged, forcing nonchalance. Work's been piling up. They need me. She seemed to accept it, and I watched her go upstairs, probably to start planning her next little adventure with him while I was gone. My stomach churned at the thought, but I kept my composure. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I slipped into the bedroom and placed the flash drive on her nightstand. My hands were shaking as I set it down, knowing what was coming next. Then, I took my bag and left the house, telling her I was heading out early for the business trip. I drove across town to the apartment we had bought for Emily when she grew up, the one we had barely used. It was empty now, a perfect place to lay low. I texted Sarah one last time, telling her to check the nightstand. It did not take long for my phone to start buzzing. Calls, texts, messages, all from her. I ignored every single one. I could not bear to hear her voice, not after everything. When I finally turned off my phone, I sat in the silence of that empty apartment, waiting for the moment she would see it all, the truth she had hidden for so long, now laid bare. And when she did, there would be no more lies. The next morning, I woke up in the small apartment to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. It had been buzzing like crazy ever since I left the flash drive for Sarah. I knew exactly what was happening. She had seen the recordings, the photos, everything. The lies she had been feeding me for months, maybe even years, were finally exposed. I rolled over, grabbed my phone, and stared at the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages. The notifications just kept coming. My hands hovered over the screen for a moment before I finally opened her messages. They started off confused. Hey, what is this? Why did you leave a flash drive here? What's on it? But then, as time passed, the tone shifted. She must have watched the recordings. She must have heard herself, seen herself. The panic in her messages was palpable. Oh my God, please call me. This is not what it looks like. I swear, I can explain. It's not what you think. Just let me talk to you. More messages flooded in, each one more frantic than the last. She was begging now. Please, just let me explain. I love you. You and Emily are my whole world. Please. I felt sick reading them, but I kept going. Part of me wanted to hear her desperation, to know she was suffering the way I had been suffering ever since I found out. But another part of me felt nothing. It was like the love I once had for her, the trust we had built over the years, had been completely hollowed out. I stared at the words on the screen, but they did not move me the way they once might have. I ignored her calls, letting them go to voicemail. I was not ready to hear her voice yet. The thought of her trying to smooth things over, trying to manipulate me into forgiving her, filled me with rage. What was she going to say? That it was just a mistake? That it had not meant anything? That she was sorry? I had heard enough of her lies. I put my phone down and stood up, pacing around the apartment. My mind was racing, my thoughts a mess. How had it come to this? We had been a family, a real family. We had built a life together, raised a daughter together. And now, it felt like none of it mattered. Sarah had thrown it all away. I thought about Emily. How was I supposed to explain this to her? She was only 9. She loved her mom, idolized her even. How could I tell her that the life we had was a lie, that her mom had betrayed me? The weight of it all pressed down on me, crushing my chest. The hours ticked by. I spent most of that day just walking around the empty apartment, staring at the walls, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I knew I could not avoid Sarah forever. Eventually, I would have to face her. I would have to confront her, listen to her excuses. But I was not ready to hear it yet. Not after everything I had seen. It was early afternoon when I finally checked my phone again. More missed calls. More texts. This time, there was a new voicemail. I hesitated for a moment before pressing play. Her voice came through the speaker, shaky and desperate. Please, please, just talk to me. I know you're angry, and I know I hurt you, but I swear, I can fix this. I made a terrible mistake, but we can work through it. For Emily.
For us.
She paused, and I could hear her sobbing on the other end. The sound of her crying might have broken me once, but now, it just felt like noise. I love you so much, and I can't lose you. Please, just call me back. Please. I ended the voicemail without replying. I had heard enough. That night, I stayed at the apartment again. I could not go back home. Not yet. The thought of seeing her, of looking into her eyes after everything, made my stomach turn. I needed more time. Time to think, to figure out what I wanted to do next. On the third day, I made a decision. I texted her. We need to talk. The response was immediate. Yes, please. Whenever you're ready. I told her I would come by the house later that evening. I did not know exactly how it would go, but I knew I needed to hear what she had to say. Maybe it would give me some kind of closure. Maybe it would just cement what I already knew. When I arrived at the house, it was quiet. I walked through the door and saw her sitting on the couch, her face pale and swollen from crying. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Hey, she said softly, almost like she was afraid of me. I stood there, staring at her. The woman I had spent 13 years with. The woman I had loved, trusted. And now, I barely recognized her. Sit down, I said, my voice flat. She nodded, wiping her face as I took a seat across from her. There was a long silence between us. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. I saw everything, I said quietly, heard everything. Her breath caught, and she looked like she was about to break down again. But I did not let her. I need to know why, I said, my voice shaking with the effort to stay calm. Why did you do it? After all these years, after everything we've built. Why? She stared at me, her eyes wide and tear-filled, like a deer caught in headlights. For a few moments, she said nothing. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. I could see her mind racing, searching for something to say, some excuse that might make sense of what she had done. Finally, she whispered, I don't know. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. She didn't know? That was her answer? That's it. I snapped. You don't know? Sarah flinched at the harshness in my voice, and for a second, I saw her trying to collect herself, to find the words that would make it all better. But there were no words that could fix this. Not now. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice trembling. It just started and I couldn't stop it. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms as I tried to keep myself from yelling. Couldn't stop it? You mean to tell me this just happened to you? Like you had no control? She looked away, shame washing over her face, and I could see the guilt weighing on her. No, I had control, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't supposed to be serious. It just got out of hand. Her words felt like salt in the wound. I wanted to scream at her, to shout about how much she had betrayed me, how she had torn our family apart. But I forced myself to stay calm. If I let my emotions take over now, I would lose whatever control I had left. So, what was it? I demanded. A fling? Some kind of midlife crisis? Or were you just bored? What the hell was it? Tears started to spill down her cheeks, and she wiped at them furiously, like she hated herself for crying. I don't know, she whispered again. It was just, I wasn't thinking. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you, I swear I do. Love? I almost laughed, the bitterness dripping from my voice. You call this love? You don't get to say you love me after what you've done, Sarah. She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. I know. I messed up. I screwed everything up, but I never wanted to lose you. I never wanted to lose our family. I stood up, pacing the room. My heart was racing, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this was just some horrible mistake, that she still cared about me and about Emily. But how could I? How could I believe anything she said after what I had seen, after what I had heard? You were with him, I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. I heard everything. You gave yourself to him. You let him have what was supposed to be mine. Sarah's breath hitched as she tried to speak, but I cut her off. You don't get to sit there and act like this was just some accident. You chose this. Every time you went to him, every time you met him in those hotel rooms, you made that choice. She was crying harder now, unable to speak, her face buried in her hands. And for a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, feeling nothing. The anger had faded, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I want to know why, I repeated, my voice steadier now. I need to know. Was I not enough? Was our life not enough for you? Was this about money? Power? What? She wiped her face, trying to compose herself. It wasn't about you, she said through her sobs. It was never about you. You've been a great husband, an amazing father. I lost myself. I don't know how to explain it. Her words felt hollow, meaningless. She could say whatever she wanted, but nothing could erase the reality of what she had done. I had been good to her. I had loved her, supported her, and never once strayed. And in return, she had taken all of that and thrown it away. You lost yourself? I repeated, disbelief in my voice. You lost yourself in his bed. Is that it? Sarah shook her head frantically, trying to correct herself. No. I didn't know how to stop. Once it started, I just kept making excuses, telling myself it wasn't serious, that I could end it any time. But I couldn't. And I'm so sorry. I hate myself for what I've done. I hate myself for hurting you. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands clenched at my sides. I didn't know what I had expected her to say, but this felt like nothing, like she was just throwing words at me, hoping something would stick, hoping that I would forgive her. But I couldn't. Not after everything. She reached out toward me, her fingers trembling, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. The idea of her hands on me, after she had been with him, made my skin crawl. Don't, I said sharply. Don't you dare try to act like we can just fix this. She broke down again, her body trembling with sobs. I know I don't deserve you. I know that. But please, for Emily's sake, can we try? I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll cut him out of my life completely. I swear it. I stared at her, trying to process what she was asking. Did she really think quitting her job or cutting off that man would make things right? Did she really believe that we could just go back to the way things were before? You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. This isn't just about him. This is about us. You destroyed everything we built. You destroyed our family. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, as if she still did not fully grasp the gravity of what she had done. I didn't mean to destroy it, she whispered. I didn't want this. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, you did. And now we have to live with that. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I could do was sit there and stare at the woman I had once loved, wondering if I would ever feel anything for her again. The silence between us hung heavy. Sarah sat there, her eyes pleading, but I had already made up my mind. The weight of her betrayal was too much to bear, and no amount of tears or promises could fix what she had broken. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice steady but cold. She shook her head, desperate. No, please, we can fix this. I'll do anything. For Emily. For us. I looked at her, the woman I had spent over a decade with, and realized I felt nothing but emptiness. You destroyed everything, Sarah. You made your choice. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I stayed firm. I'll stay for Emily, I continued. But that's it. We're just parents now. Nothing more. She let out a shaky breath, trying to grasp onto anything that might change my mind. Please. I love you. But love was not enough anymore. You made your decision the moment you went to him, I said quietly. We're over. She collapsed into sobs, but I could not let her emotions sway me. It was too late for that. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind with the weight of her choices. Moving into the empty apartment felt strange at first, but there was a sense of relief too. It was over. The endless lies, the betrayal. I could finally breathe. Sarah stayed in the house for a few more weeks, still clinging to the hope that we could fix things. But I made my boundaries clear. I was done. We would be parents for Emily, but nothing more. And then one day, she called me. Her voice was quiet, almost resigned. I'm leaving, she said. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while. I can't stay here anymore. Okay, I replied, without emotion. We'll work out how to co-parent Emily. She agreed, and that was it. A few days later, she was gone. The house was empty, and my life was officially split from hers. It was not easy, but it felt right. I focused on Emily, making sure she felt loved and protected, keeping the ugliness of what had happened away from her as much as I could. Time passed, and while the pain of betrayal lingered, I started to rebuild. The days turned into weeks, then months. Sarah and I remained civil, interacting only for the sake of our daughter. The love we once had was gone, replaced by a hollow sense of partnership, two people raising a child, but nothing more. Looking back, I realized that our marriage had been dying long before the affair. Sarah's betrayal had only brought it to light. Now, I was focused on what came next. Not for her, not even for the past we lost, but for myself and for Emily. I do not know what the future holds, but I know I will face it head-on. I am no longer the man I was, but maybe that is for the best. This is the beginning of something new, something better.